Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tony Morbin and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of SC Magazine UK. Welcome to our editorial webcast, Applications Matter, So Should Application Security. You know that your staff are using apps and you know that there have been several security breaches via apps. Now whether apps are your major source of revenue or simply being used to communicate with customers, the chances are that you've failed to reflect their importance in your security spend and failed to acknowledge the costs of an attack on them and your brand. Today we're going to look at how to create and maintain an application security strategy that doesn't get in the way of doing business. Our speakers today are Matthew Schofield, Senior Consultant, Security Solutions for NTT Com Security, responsible for security guidance, solution design and technical account management to NTT's national and strategic account clients. Matthew has more than 15 years' experience in the IT industry, primarily in information security. His expertise in virtualization, remote access, encryption, secure application delivery, identity management and secure monitoring has been developed globally and across a range of sectors. And Jason Smith, Senior Security Engineer, F5 Networks, works with F5 customers and partners, helping them re-architect their approach to application security to fight against the increasing level and sophistication of attacks. With a background in both data center engineering and software lifecycle development, he has a broad understanding of the challenges businesses face, all the way from data on the wire to application and back-end databases. Over to you, Matt and Jason.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony. Right.
So, attackers, they've never had it so easy. And as an industry, unfortunately, I strongly believe we are going downhill. It's evident from the depth and the breadth of attacks that are now going on in the mainstream that attackers have got a wealth of opportunity. There's no doubt about it that the targets are plentiful and the rewards are very rich. And over the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to look at this and try and understand, from an application perspective, what an organization can do to protect itself.
So, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, it's worth going over some of the current trends that are affecting this drive towards being more cognizant of application security. One of those things is the fact that the landscape is changing. You know, users are going mobile. There's more types of devices that we need to concern ourselves with. Everything is webified. The expression that HTTP is the new TCP. You know, we don't typically have to concern ourselves with every single thick application that's out there. We actually more and more now have to worry about HTTP being the transport, because from an app development perspective, you know, that it's much easier for companies to develop stuff over HTTP as a transport, and using things like HTML and CSS and JavaScript and these other rich languages that you can present information in. And then all the way to the back end servers in a data center, the security has gone way, way beyond that. So the perimeter of where an attack might strike is far, far beyond the server, all the way back really to the mobile itself. And all of these shifts in technology that you can see here are creating great opportunities. You know, so the mobile opportunity for being able to connect to customers and users at any time, anywhere. The move to a software-defined data center or a cloud architecture to save costs and be more agile and responsive to customers' needs. The seemingly endless drive of e-commerce. You know, if you look back kind of 10, 15 years, I don't think many people have been able to predict the rise and boom of e-commerce and the closing down of all of our high streets, right? It's really created some great new opportunities for expanding and moving a business globally as opposed to just regionally. Software-defined everything. So towards the back end of last year, a lot of large companies and vendors made a lot of announcements around software-defined networking being the next big thing, if you like, in architectures, in networking architectures. And that has implications all the way from the network all the way up to the application. And the Internet of Things, right? So now, you know, my fridge has an IP address, my kettle can launch a DDoS attack, you know, everything now has an IP address. Everything now is a vector that I need to consider, but, you know, it's a great opportunity as a company, right? As a customer, I can consume things and I can interact with absolutely everything. But the opportunities are great for companies and customers, but they're also great for the bad guys, the adversaries, because this now gives them this absolutely huge attack plane, if you like, to start looking at. So now they can start looking at how can we manipulate mobile devices, how can we manipulate all these other things that have IP addresses that have interfaces that I can start to talk to that were never a possibility before, to start to either get private data or to start launching large-scale attacks.
So there's no doubt about it now that information security's gone mainstream. It's part of the mainstream media. The attacks most recently, obviously the eBay breach has been the front page. It's been front page news, and you know, our friends and family who neither knew nor cared about information security are taking interest now, not in the topic itself, but in what to do and what's good and what's bad, and how they can sidestep all these problems that are being created for them. There's no doubt about it that organizations need to be acutely aware of the negativity that can come that can associate with their brands as a result of a breach or a hack of some kind. So organizations have got to be acutely aware of what their applications, the problems their applications can present them. To illustrate the point, I think you need to look at the Heartbleed vulnerabilities that occurred very recently, and the fact that for the first time ever, information security, or the negative impact of information security, had a brand. Heartbleed got its own image, its own logo. So it's definitely, the awareness is elevated well beyond the remit of us as professionals. And if we look at, for example, the scrutiny that's gone on for OpenSSL, and the fact that most recently, as Friday, there were 6 new flaws found in OpenSSL that in turn create a whole load of problems for organizations who are using it as a cornerstone of their customer-facing applications and services. So there's no doubt about it that organizations need to up their game and become far more agile, both to identifying problems, responding to problems in a positive way. And you know, news today is that Anonymous are going to be targeting the major advertisers associated with the World Cup around the negativity of what they believe is, you know, misspent money on commercial activities rather than on some of the problems that Brazil itself as a country faces. So it's all about headlines, and more importantly, from as providers of these services to customers, it's all about trying to stay out of the headlines. And to really understand the scale of the problem, we can look at the reasonably well-known IBM X-Force mid-year report. So this one's from 2013. So there'll be another one due out shortly. But what we can see here is that the attacks and the security incidents associated with application security are the yellow ones, the red ones, and the orange ones. There's also the grey balls there, which are unknown attacks. So I think we can assume, sort of prorated, that a number of those grey balls would also be application security issues. But what this tells us is that, you know, by far the severest types of attacks based on time and impact are the ones associated with application security, and the ones that can be mitigated by a proper application security strategy. So to understand this, we've got to really take a look at what application security is.
And, you know, I think a nice way of looking at that is to go back to the OSI model, right? The 7-layer OSI model, because I think that kind of puts quite a nice break in the line of where I guess network security stops and application security starts. So if you look at the kind of the bottom 3 layers of the OSI model, you know, the physical, data link, networking, that's usually around things like volumetric attacks, DDoS attacks, attacks that are quite annoying. And I think this is probably where people are very comfortable with. You know, this is stuff like firewalls. This is stuff like switches and routers, where you can apply security policies on a port level or on a policy level. And it's very much geared towards all these terms you don't really need to worry about, but it's all very much geared towards disrupting a network service. So these kinds of attacks at this layer don't really hold any information. Yet, you know, we're quite comfortable as vendors and as people who work in technology and security about talking about these and being able to design these kinds of things and inspect these kinds of things. This is kind of the old world, if you like, a little bit. You know, it's firewalls, it's IPSs, it's stuff that people are very comfortable with. But ultimately, those kinds of attacks are really very much geared towards disrupting network services. You know, taking people offline, you know, stopping e-commerce. So these are still quite severe things, but what they don't really do is they're not attacking data. Okay, they're not attacking the application. And this is the kind of, you know, again, lots of terms on the screen here which you can kind of browse through, but things like SQL injection attacks and things like brute force attacks and being able to take over someone's session. So if I'm logged into my online banking, if someone takes over that session that I've established with NatWest or whichever bank, high street bank you want to pick, you know, there's huge implications of that. If someone starts to set up a direct debit to some other account, I mean, that's obviously not in my interest. So, but that all happens at the application layer. Well, that doesn't happen at the lower layers. That a firewall doesn't care about that kind of stuff. An IPS device, arguably, it doesn't really care about, doesn't really know about that kind of stuff. So you need to start thinking about, how do I start to apply security products or services or layers of infrastructure to start, controls that will stop the attack on application information. Because I mean, all the attacks that Matt you looked at earlier on from the BBC and all the news headlines, you know, they aren't that user data, you know, credit card information and national insurance information, that doesn't come out of a router or a switch. Okay, that comes out of a database, that comes out of a web app, and the protections you have to put in place are at that kind of layer. A firewall will not recognize that or will not care about that.
I mean, it can be so subtle as well, because if you go all the way up, say even beyond things like SQL injection to business logic manipulation, this is people working within the boundaries of what the application itself should do, and finding weaknesses to expose the application for whatever means, to break the application, to make fraudulent transactions, to subvert the functionality of the application. But it's all about the subtlety, and it's all about the fact that these things, these types of attacks need special and dedicated controls in order to be able to detect and to block them.
Yeah, and I think the bottom half of this, people are fairly good at, you know, depending on where you look. I think most customers are fairly happy with the bottom half about having firewalls and configuring firewalls, and then everyone, when you talk to a security guy, even someone who isn't that au fait with security, you know, we need a firewall. It's something that people understand. You know, we need a web application firewall, or we need to review our security policy for access to applications, is a lot less tangible, and I think a lot of people are not as comfortable at all yet. And I think that's a time thing. I think over time that will change, and we are seeing that now, that it is changing. But if you look, and some of this information does come from a slightly older Gartner report, so there are other third-party sources to this, but the vast majority of the investment budget that goes to security goes into the bottom stack of that picture. It goes into network threats. It goes into protecting companies against things like flood attacks, DDoS type attacks. The reality is the attackers themselves know that. Okay, people like Anonymous and script kiddies and people who want to get credit card information out of a company, they know that the network is well protected. You know, they're probably very au fait with those kinds of appliances, and they know how they work, and they know the kind of security model that they're trying to enforce. And to get around that, they go up the stack. They'll go up to the application layer. They will start to use application layer attacks, and ultimately, as I said before, that is where the data lives anyway. So they're launching their attack on a layer of the infrastructure that most customers aren't comfortable with properly implementing and going out and researching, because it is different. It's a very, very different way of doing things. But they know that, and they will take advantage of that, and they will start to launch attacks at that layer to get user information out of your back end, or to disrupt a service at layer 7 as opposed to layer 4, because you've got those pieces of infrastructure in place already to protect against that, right? So things like layer 7 DDoS attacks, right? So flood attacks aren't limited to just sort of layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 boxes, firewalls and routers and switches and such. You can have those kinds of attacks launched on you at a much higher layer in the stack, and it's stuff that firewalls and IPSs and things like that just won't pick up.
So I want to talk a little bit about what the industry is doing to address these issues, and I suppose the cornerstone of awareness around web application security is the OWASP project, the Open Web Application Security Project, which is a not-for-profit organisation, truly worldwide, and they've made it their business over probably the last around about 10 years or so to increase awareness into the security of software, and primarily that of internet-facing web-based applications, which is fundamentally what we're talking about here. Now, the sorts of things that they've identified, they annually review the types of attacks that are going on, the prevalence of the attacks, and the risk associated with the attacks. And for 2013, they said that SQL injection is the top problem that application writers need to address. It's the thing that's most often abused by attackers, and it's the thing that has the biggest ramifications in terms of data loss and such like. There's also other attack types, broken authentication and session management, cross-site scripting and insecure objects that are out of the scope for discussion of exactly what these are and how to protect against them. Now here's the really damning bit, and the bit that supports my original statement about, as an industry, we're going downhill, we're going backwards. If we look at the prevalence and risk of attacks back through 2010 and 2007, we'll see that this top 4 list hasn't really changed. The problems that we're facing remain problems, and as an industry, we've failed to address these. So, yeah, sure, the breadth of applications has grown between 2007 and 2013, but the problems remain the same. And I think this is particularly damning. And it supports that statement that Jason made, that it's primarily or partly because investment's done in the wrong place. Organizations who are buying into security are still buying, and certainly in 2007 were buying traditional network security products in order to protect them. And as we've discussed and we've illustrated, those controls do not protect you for the sorts of things that IBM and OWASP have identified as being the predominant issues that we're facing as an industry. So there's no doubt about it that this is a problem. I think, if we look at what application development is and what application development does, on the next slide, we'll get more of an insight into why security is so bad.
And I guess going back to what you just mentioned, if I was to go back to the slide about the amount of investment in the network and the amount of attacks on the application, as a vendor, I think it is partially our fault, as vendors, because you have very large vendors who will sell firewalls and IPSs, and they have very large sales teams who do that, and it is quite an easy message to understand. So I think as an industry, I think the vendors in the industry are it's not really the customer's fault or anyone else's fault really, that we are in this situation of application security being in the state that it is in as Matt says, it's going downhill. I think if you look at all the vendors who will sell switches and sell routers and sell firewalls and IPS devices, they have charged very, very large sales teams and to go out and sell those devices. So there's a very large push from big corporations to do this as well. So it's an uphill struggle, and I think only the more advanced customers and end users see that application security is very difficult. You only usually find smaller companies or some of the other big companies are starting to come on board now, talking about application security and really pushing it as a primary focus. I think that's some of the history behind it, really, about why we're in this state as well.
Yeah, we're not saying that network security is not valid, of course.
No.
Certainly has its place, and it's the place where you start. Nobody ever said you don't need a firewall, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's got to be done, but there's no doubt about it. It's been commoditized. It's a given that it's there. It's actually not hard to do, and certainly not compared to application security. And this is probably one of the challenges that's put people off in the past, that it is harder to do is application security. So, there's a number of reasons why it's not been done, but yeah, we'll explore those. Now.
So, what does an application owner, someone who deploys an application, actually really worry about? And we won't go through all of these, but things like, is my application highly available? Can I meet SLAs? Things like the cost of it, obviously important. There's always pressure from top down on what is the actual dollar value of rolling this app out. And stuff like features as well, like, are all the features that I'm implementing in this application going to give me the edge over anyone else who might be doing something similar? But what you probably don't see, what an application owner probably doesn't really worry about is security, okay? Out of all these kind of bubbles you see here as a snapshot.
Not his problem, yeah?
Yeah, that's his problem. But it's usually an afterthought, right? It's usually something that will get bolted on after the project's been rolled out, or it's yeah, absolutely, it's not his problem, right? He'll chuck it over the fence to someone else, or on the networking team, or on the security team, if a company's even got one, to deal with, right? I'm just the app dude. All I care about is rolling out Exchange or a VDI project or whatever kind of thing I want to roll, or my new web application.
Mobile gaming platform.
Yeah, the next Candy Crush, right? That's all I care about is developing that, rolling it out, and chucking it over the fence for someone else to implement all the other features and security things to it, right? So they don't, even though the problem is that layer, the guy that rolls it out isn't necessarily concerned with that. So it often ends up with someone else to try and, if you like, remediate that.
So we've been pretty damning all along. We've said, okay, application security is bad, or rather it creates big problems. We've said that the general view within the industry is that it's not done very well, or it's not done at all, that the same problems prevalent, that were prevalent 6, 7 years ago, and that people just don't care, or rather the people who are deploying the applications just don't care. So assuming now that there's a glimmer of hope for application security, and that as an organization we're going to, or as an industry, we're going to wake up and start to address the problem, then what can we do about it? How do we go about it? So we're going to talk through a number of the things that you can do now to address the problems, and it really does start with the simple understand the scale of the problem. So take a look at your environment, take a look at your applications, and we're talking about internet-facing applications, customer-facing applications, applications that are in some way transactional. So take a look at those and understand what you've got, what vulnerabilities might exist within that environment, and what the risk is to the business of an attack or a loss of data associated with that application or that environment. Because once you understand the scale of the problem, it'll allow you to focus your budgets and allow you to focus your efforts on remediating it. Now remember, we said this isn't easy, and it isn't easy. But in order to really tackle the problem head on, it's important to develop some sort of framework to understand where does application security sit within the wider remit of security, and then beyond security within the even wider remit of risk. So look at roles and responsibilities and understand how you can align the business, management, operations, and technology to put the right framework in place so that everybody does clearly know what their roles and responsibilities are, and there's clearly defined processes. And once you've done that, it'll allow you to address actually what you can do with the application itself, with the infrastructure, and with controls in order to actually put in some method of protection. Jason's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So yeah, I think absolutely you need to have all the controls in place. I think policies, layer 8, if you like, the actual users themselves and people themselves is as important as application security. But unfortunately, that's not a topic that we can cover. But when the rubber meets the road and you kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of it, and when we talk about, okay, I think I have an insecure application and I need to do something about it, what do you do? I mean, what is the approach? I mean, what is the solution, if you like? And there's kind of two ways that you can do it, really. You could rewrite the whole application, make the application secure, which is an option. If you own the application, you can do this. Clearly, it's probably quite an expensive thing to do because you need a team of developers, and the bigger your application and the bulkier your application, the more developers you need, and that's all headcount, that's cost.
The longer it takes to get the application to market.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that applications are written have changed a lot even in recent years, with things like agile development and agile software development. Like I say, getting stuff to market very, very quickly, where we can roll out patches to software every day. We can do a new drop. You need to have a culture change in how you do secure application development. Again, that is an expensive process, right? To make sure everyone goes through that process of doing secure application development from the bottom up.
And of course, within an application development team, depending on the size and scale of that application development team, you need to start to have dedicated champions who will represent security within the various towers of application development. So, and that is the culture change thing, that yes, it's about features, and yes, it's about shiny stuff, but yes, it's about security as well, because the business is driving the mandate that says these things must be secure. We've done our risk analysis, and we need to ensure that our application is secure. the culture change can be quite huge, really.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the people who write this code are human beings. Human beings are very prone to making mistakes. There is no such thing as bug-free code. So even when they do go through this culture change and they do go through secure software development life cycles, it is still prone to error to a degree. You know, you can never stomp out every single bug and every single hole. And then also that application is, well, it's just that application, right? So if you've got 10, 20, 30, 40 apps, well, you need teams to develop those 10, 20, 30, 40 apps. So scaling that and moving beyond one app is very difficult. And actually, potentially, it's impossible because maybe it isn't your app, right? Maybe you're rolling out SharePoint or Link or Exchange or one of the other Microsoft or VMware or Citrix or whatever apps. You know, whatever app it is, it doesn't really matter. If it's not open source and it's not your code, well, how are you going to rewrite it? So it's sometimes it's not possible to do the left-hand side. So what tends to happen is the right-hand side, right? We use intermediary devices and controls to intercept traffic, to intercept responses as well as requests to go to the application and for the application to talk back to the user. And then we can start to do manipulation, and we can start to look at traffic, and we can make decisions based on our security policies. You know, not to say that this is a cheap way either. I mean, you know, still you have to buy devices, you have to have some in-house skills, but it will scale a lot better because, well, you can use the same devices across whatever apps you have, and it is, yeah, less prone to error. You're kind of at the mercy of other vendors, except for yourself, unless you have the time, the budget, and the will to go off and make your own equipment out of Google or Amazon or someone. But if you're like the rest of the world, then yeah, you would use other vendors' equipment to implement those intermediary controls. And I think that the right-hand side is not exclusive of the left-hand side. You know, you still, if you are writing your own applications and you have control over your own destiny to that extent, then you still need to look at implementing that kind of culture change of secure coding practices. But it goes hand in hand with using intermediary controls, things like firewalls, things like IPS devices, but also other, you know, higher level things like web application firewalls and, you know, full proxy kind of devices that can actually inspect and look at traffic as it flows through a network between an app and an end user. Right? So that's kind of the real way that most of the rest of the world gets around that.
Yeah, and if you look at things like you know, business logic manipulation done on the back of, or identified on the back of some form of statistical modeling of what normal use looks like, and therefore what abnormal use looks like, you absolutely have to be in at the application layer, at the session layer, to be able to start to model those kinds of things. And it's kind of it's a big statistical analysis problem, and something that if you were tasked with putting it into your application, okay, we need some analysis, we need some statistics from the back of the application that will alert us to abnormal usage of our application. It's an immensely difficult task, and it would take you away from having to write or being able to write all these cool new features and go to market capabilities that your application developments frankly are getting paid to do.
Yeah, and even, I mean, the part on the right-hand side of using intermediary controls still does require input from guys who write the apps. Okay, so it's you know, if you go back a few slides to talking about the guy who owns the app and what does he think about, well, you need to kind of pull him into that conversation of, look, we're looking at using some way of, or some kind of device that can intercept traffic and maybe look at it and inspect it and start securing it. We need to understand the application, right? You can't do one without the other. You know, this is kind of trying to, you need to kind of break down those silos of teams who I'm an app developer. Yeah, I understand the application extremely well, and a guy who maybe is a security guy in a security silo, and he also understands it very, very well.
I think to illustrate the point, it takes you then back, once you've decided on controls, to to the management framework that yes, we've decided the scale of the problem and we've understood the sorts of controls we want to put in place. We absolutely still need to nail the roles and responsibilities and the processes and the tasks and the things that will drive this, because it's certainly not static. You know, new attacks come along, the application changes, so this is not and never will be a point in time. You could argue, well, traditional security is never a point in time, but it's far more static than application security. So absolutely, whichever choice you take, you need to continue to develop and reinforce and make practical the application security management framework.
Yeah. So, in closing?
Yeah, so just as a reminder how to tackle this problem is absolutely start with looking at the apps and try and get actually beyond security and to the broader arena of risk to say, what do these applications mean to us as a business, and what happens if these applications become non-functional or present a problem to the business. So it drives the conversation higher up above and beyond just security, and it's a far more mature conversation to have. So take a broad look at the applications and what their availability and what their security means to the business. And then from there, it'll allow you to articulate the business case for application security. Now, again, the business case for security is reasonably well understood. I think organizations get that, you know, security typically doesn't drive revenue. It's more of an insurance type policy. But this is more specifically around taking that pot of money, that budget, and making sure that it's spent in the right place, and that actually some of that money is specifically there to address the security concerns around the applications themselves. Now, of course, if you're an organization who doesn't have a strong e-commerce or internet-facing presence, or maybe that only forms a smaller percentage of your business activities, then it's going to be less of an issue. But of course, more and more organizations now are using that environment as a marketplace, and must absolutely ensure that they get the right money in and spend it in the right areas, and really just to develop a roadmap for change. This is not an overnight fix. This is not something that you get as a result of enabling a license on a firewall or something like that. It's all about change, and it's all about the things that I referenced in the management framework, that you absolutely have to build processes around this for it to work properly. So assuming that you've got the budget, assuming that you've got the green light to go ahead and address application security, then absolutely be prepared for the long haul. It's not easy, but one would assume that based on the risk-based audit, it is going to be worthwhile.
Cool. And that's it from us. So, Tony.
Thanks for your presentation, Matt and Jason. We can now take a few questions from our audience. I had a few questions myself, but I must admit you've preempted some of them, but with the breadth of your coverage there. One of the things you did say is that you know, it's not easy to actually understand your vulnerability on apps. So who in an organization is the best person to do this risk-focused audit of your apps? I mean, is it your IT staff, or is it something the board should be doing, or should you be getting in experts from outside, specialists?
So, yes, risk is a mature conversation, and if an organization has got a good view of the risk that exists within the business, both inside and outside of IT and information, then engage with them. They should be able to understand and articulate on the sorts of things that you need to consider when you're taking a risk-based view of your application security. If that's not the case, though, then certainly organizations like NTT ComSecurity can help you there. We've got a team of consultants who are very capable of performing. There's a service that we call Risk Insight, which is a short engagement to take a look at a specified problem and understand the risks associated with that specified problem and how those risks can be mitigated.
I mean, the big problem for users is always, getting somebody to advise you who then advises you to spend money with them. Now, you've already mentioned the fact that people are spending a lot of money on network threats when, in fact, network threats are not where the majority of threats are coming from. So when you're now looking at reallocating spend, are you saying that it is a reallocation of your existing spend on network, or is this going to be in addition to what you're spending on the networks?
Yeah, I think that the shift is slowly happening. I mean, there is a shift moving away from pure network security spend, and moving towards application security. It's a lot slower than I think we would, or customers would like and people would like. And you only have to look at the BBC to work that out. But I think it should come out of the overall security budget. I think the thing with that slide, or I guess that statement, is that a lot of that security spend does kind of come out of the network budget as well. And I think networking teams get a lot of stuff chucked over the fence to them because it's not someone else's problem, right? It's not the app guy's problem. It's the networking guy's problem if he hasn't secured the network properly.
Because he runs the firewall,
yeah.
Therefore he's nominally responsible for security.
Yeah, so he owns everything in the rack, right? So I've got this massive rack with all this kit in it. Okay, it might have servers that run applications on it, right? But it's the networking guy's rack, so it's your responsibility. So I think a lot of the budget for these kinds of things comes out of networking budget as well as security budgets. But in an ideal world, you'd want this kind of project to come out of a combination of security budget and even application budget, arguably. So it's kind of a mixture, really, of a few different worlds.
Now, as well as we're talking about having to rethink your risk, do audits, you may get involved in development work, but then you also mentioned equipment to implement controls. What sort of equipment are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, F5 specialised in this kind of area for a very long time, and I know Secure Computing have actually did a review a couple of years ago on ASM, Application Security Manager, which is a web application firewall that does implement layer 7 kind of securities, as well as layer 2 and upwards, really. So like we said before, you don't kind of get rid of the old model. You still have to secure the lower end of the stack, the networking end of the stack. But if you want to implement something that can start to actually protect the application, you have to look at an intermediary device if you don't own the code or own a load of developers, and then you have to look at companies like F5 who can provide web application firewalls and who can fully proxy all communication that goes between a device and an app, right? So then you can kind of look into all of the SSL payload, you can unencrypt it, you can look at the data, you can inspect what's really going through your network and going to a back-end application, and what's coming from a back-end application and going back to the user. So even if someone does successfully somehow circumnavigate your security and launch an attack, you still don't want credit card data coming out of a back-end database if it's not supposed to go to someone through a web page. So to have a device that can have that level of understanding and level of detail on the app is absolutely critical.
And that in itself, the challenges associated with that are quite significant because, as we've seen with other technology areas and other controls, if you're going to get introspection into encrypted communications and really build up and understand what's going on at the session or the user layer end to end, so user logs in, user does something else, data leaves the building, then to do that, it takes effort, it takes the right tools, and it is quite a performance intensive task or a processor intensive task. So it's absolutely essential to get the right tools and to ensure that they're sized and spec'd correctly to do the job.
I mean, you've been, obviously aiming to be as fair-minded as you can between intermediate controls and rewriting the application. But I get the clear kind of message that use of intermediate controls is probably your favoured option. But wouldn't it have been better to implement good security at the initial programming stage? Shouldn't the effort be put at getting application developers to actually build in security?
Should.
Yeah, 100% yes. And although I'm an F5 employee, my background is I have done quite a lot of software development in my past. And actually, if we lived in a world where people wrote programs that were bug-free, then we wouldn't need devices like this. Absolutely. If code was programmed securely all the time, a lot of companies would go out of business probably, right? It's just the reality of it. But yeah. Like I said before, we're humans. We're human beings. Human beings are writing the code, and we do make mistakes, and we do implement bugs. And only retrospectively can you kind of implement security to address that. And stuff like Heartbleed, right? I mean, go back to the Heartbleed example. That's a bug that's been out in the open for like 7 years, something like that, several years, and no one picked up on it. So, and then someone does, and then everyone kind of throws their toys out the pram and goes crazy. But it does happen, and to go back and retrospectively implement a patch to every single box on the planet that implements that version of OpenSSL is an absolutely gargantuan task. And you see people scurrying around to do it now. And
again, since Heartbleed with the 6 new vulnerabilities.
Yeah, with the 6 new vulnerabilities.
Yeah. And then again next week.
So an intermediate. So to kind of get to your point. Yes, I think secure coding is the answer, but that's unfortunately just not the world we live in. And you have to look at the other side, using an intermediary device, like I say, a box that can proxy absolutely everything that goes through the box, and actually inspect is this a Heartbleed attack? If we can work that out the day that the CVE gets posted on the web and implement a fix for it. Then we're way ahead of all of our competitors, right? We've already implemented the fix, and we can tell our customers about it because we've got a box in the middle that can secure it for us.
And the Heartbleed thing indicates the dependencies as well. So a lot of organisations will be writing applications that will sit on top of other people's code, such as OpenSSL or Tomcat or whatever it might be. And so if everybody was writing secure code everywhere, then there would be no problems. But even if as an organisation you're writing secure code on top of other people's frameworks, as Heartbleed is testament to, it doesn't mean to say that everybody's writing with the same rigour and standards. So it is a hugely challenging thing. Culture aside, and the fact that you as an organisation may get to grips with secure development, it's the dependencies and the problems outside that you still have to have consideration for.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's going to be levels of security, and some apps are going to be a lot more secure than others. Are there any types of apps that you would suggest that you should simply ban? And going on from that, isn't that kind of almost like the antivirus approach? banning known and unsafe apps and allowing safe ones a reasonable and cheaper approach?
Yeah.
Not really, no. You can't. Organisations who've gone to market with a particular application, they're not going to retract that application. They're not going to revoke the application and say, oh, we're not going to do this anymore, because it's their marketplace and it's their route to talking to their customers. So no, I mean, imagine, for example, Salesforce was deemed unsecure tomorrow, and all the organisations in the world that log in and transact through Salesforce, they wouldn't suddenly stop using it because it would massively disrupt their business model. So, even in an application it is unsecure, it'll continue to be used, and the idea that it might be revoked or turned off is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't advise companies to ban some particular known apps known to be particularly unsafe?
Well, I think although the topic is very 2013, I think if you talk about BYOD as an example, people will get around it. People will bring your own app. I mean, people will bring apps. They'll find a way to get around corporate controls. Users aren't as stupid as people make out sometimes, and they will find a way to get around corporate controls, whether that's using a proxy, whether that's using VPNs. They will find a way to get that app into the environment if they really, really want to. Not even moderately advanced users, basic users can go into Google and find out, how do I access Facebook at work? And I'm sure if I type that into Google now, I'd get a bunch of hits with a bunch of software to tell me how to get around, my URL filter at work to get my app that I want. So there may be a list of apps, but I think it's you're kind of running through treacle as an organisation if you're going to try and implement those.
Because there's an unending list, yeah. But what about an employee who is, totally cooperative, very helpful, comes along and says, I've got this new app here that would be really useful for our business, and I'd like to use it. What's the recommended response to that? The sort of process to follow, perhaps.
I guess, I mean, if they had their own application or they wanted to use something that was blocked or wasn't allowed, I guess it's going back to Matt's point of doing that risk analysis and finding out what's the benefit of allowing that, and then what's the cost of not allowing that. I guess it's quite a hard question to answer. You'd have to look at it by case by case. I guess it's
And in terms of actually sort of encouraging more of the spend to go from the network towards the apps, I mean, again, I suppose we've got to look at some of the reasons for it, and I'm wondering how much might have to do with regulation, compliance, and the perception of the risk. So, for instance, insurance premiums might be less if you've got certain types of firewall. Are they going to be less if you have certain types of app security?
So if you look at PCI, for example, that specifically calls out the use of secure development practices or the deployment of web application firewalls to protect e-commerce.
PCI is the payment card, the credit card.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So this topic is on the compliance agenda. Organisations, I think they're gonna really look at three things when they are concerned themselves with the risk of not doing security, and that's what's the regulatory view of not doing security properly, and what might happen if they get caught by the regulators. The loss of revenue associated with fraudulent activities or security, negative security activities around the website or the application, and then the loss of customers. What happens if how many people will walk away if our service is in the headlines for a security breach? So
I mean, to a large extent, you're kind of. I was going to ask you, to articulate the business case for app security, and I guess this is what you're saying now, in terms of whether it's a make money or avoid losing money.
Yeah. So regulation is obviously a big deal, and it's indirectly related to the ability to make money, because if you can't operate or you're fined repeatedly as a result of breaching the regulations, then it does affect the bottom line. But yeah, the loss of revenue and the loss of customers are absolutely those three things collectively will allow you to understand the business case for doing it. Take any in isolation, yes, that's fine, but really got to look across all three. Now, of course, some organisations might not be mandated by regulatory controls, but fundamentally here we're talking about e-commerce type activity, so PCI is usually there, but it could be other financial services regulations, or an organisation's ability to better claim and demonstrate to its customers that it's undertaking best practice. So yeah, they're all things that you should consider.
Okay, now just we're going to be closing up in a minute, but just tell me a little bit more about the Open Web Application Security Project. Again, just reiterate who's behind it, when it started, and what its aims are.
Yeah, so it started
2004.
Yeah, 2004. So it's very mature in the grand scheme of things, and it is about, so web applications were, I suppose, the forefront and the mainstay subsequently of online transaction type activities, e-commerce type activities. So they've made it their business to educate, or to try and educate application developers around secure coding and the things to be aware of in order to ensure that code is reasonably secure, or as secure as can be, as is possible. It's very worldwide, so it's kind of broken up, I suppose, into subgroups of chapters. So there's representation all around the world where people get together to discuss these issues. And this OWASP top 10 list, excuse me, OWASP top 10 list is quite widely recognized as being the 10 things that you should do as an organization to ensure your application is secure. So it's trying to distill it down, to try and make it simple, so that as a task it doesn't seem quite as insurmountable. As you saw, though, within the slides, actually the top 10 really can be simmered down to a top 4, or rather 4 things that have repeatedly been problems over the past 10 or so years. So their efforts are to be applauded, but clearly there's something not happening, because they're banging the same drum and the same noise is coming out, and people are not getting aligned with it.
I guess you could even boil it down from 4 to 1, which is SQL injection attack.
Yeah.
Because if you go back to the IBM export support, right, there's loads of yellow bubbles. That is kind of the number one, and it has been for years, and people still don't do anything about it. But SQL injection, I mean, that is one vector. But if you were implementing app security correctly, you'd be getting rid of that and all the others as well. I mean, you wouldn't just go out of your way just to stop SQL injection attacks on your website. You would implement the whole kit and caboodle, and SQL injection should be a large focus of that.
Absolutely. You're going to start somewhere.
You're going to start.
No. I mean that's really good. I mean, because we're just winding up now. So we've got the OWASP top 10 boiled down to a top 4, with SQL far and away the main thing that you need to be doing. So that's kind of a summation of what we need to be doing. And really, I guess the other thing is people do actually need to be doing it, because, as you say, they've been going on about it since 2004, and time for action. I'm sorry, that will have to be it now for this session. Our thanks to Matthew Schofield and Jason Smith for sharing their insight and expertise today, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. This webcast is available on demand on the SC Magazine UK website at www.scmagazine.com under the Events tab. Thank you very much.